So I'm going to introduce the concept of digital whistleblowing. Then I'm going to show some examples of digital whistleblowing, and I would like to have a discussion with people interested in how the Global Voices community could actually contribute to initiatives around whistleblowing, either as a receiver of whistleblowing documents or as a part of a whistleblowing mechanism. But I mean, that's up to the discussion I have with you. So I'm not from the Hermes Center for Transparency and Digital Human Rights, but we support them. I'm from HIVOS. Gilo is sitting here. He is actually now working for the Hermes Center for Transparency and Digital Human Rights. Whistleblowing is something that's already existing for since humanity, I would say. And it starts at a very early stage of people telling about each other what not and what to do. Digital anonymity is something which was already touched upon in the morning sessions and in earlier sessions, and it comes out everywhere in meetings where we have this. Global Leaks is the platform that's actually supposed to combine the whistleblowing and digital anonymity, and therefore creating a new tool that actually is contributing towards a bigger usage of whistleblowing practices. Just going to, so we throughout the work that we do, we as funder, as HIVOS, we try to solve problems, we try to get information together, we try to inform media, we try to work with media, we try to work with NGOs to get things on a bigger scale, to fight certain topics like, in this case, corruption, advocacy issues, and all these kind of stuff. It can be like non-digital by creating an anti-corruption suggestion box, but what we want to achieve is to get it a little bit more in a connected world. We combine the whistleblowing that's already happening with the technology to enable citizens, to empower citizens to get what I want. So that's why we created this concept of digital whistleblowing. We have examples of already known whistleblowers, digital whistleblowers, already mentioned earlier these days as well, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning. WikiLeaks is another example of known leaking institutes, but these are kind of like, it's not, as a user you can get the material from it, but it's not easy to add to it. So you can read them, you can do stuff with it, but you cannot really, as a citizen, add information to WikiLeaks. This slide was already shown today as well. This is an example of the WikiLeaks cables that created attention in the media and get tools for people to follow up on and get it into civil society actions. But we still wanted to make it a more open and more interactive way for people to actually use the system as well, where we are very aware of the risks, that people are taking. We today in the first topic we talked about the anonymity, privacy. So by the development of the tool itself, we put those elements as being very important to protect the leaker from exposure. And so you can take them offline, but you have to be aware that the government's surveillance is growing, so we really have to protect the people that actually want to do the leaking as well. So it's something, and we are not looking only at digital. So it's not about that you always have these high classified documents that are existing in some kind of government building, and then you have to take that document out and leak it. I mean, that can happen, but it's also important that you actually open it up more for organizations actually to show media as well, like what could happen, what is actually going on around areas where there is suspicion around corruption or other examples. So the software, the tool itself ensures digital security for the leaker. It's using the Tor network to prevent people to find where the source is coming from. It's using data encryption so that the receiver or everybody in between the leak and the receiver also doesn't know where to use it for. And it's also using data retention. So the software in itself is capable of protecting the sources and get it to wherever you want to have it to. So that's why we call the whole tool as Whistleblowing 2.0. And I'm going to show a few examples of where it's like already working. This is an example I'd love to from Hungary. We have somebody in the room that can actually tell more about it. I'm happy if you do it after my presentation, because Gilo is also going to tell something about EveryLeaks, and then you can probably add some to your experience as well. This is a specific site around anti-corruption activism using the same tool. Just government transparency activism also using this tool. And I'm going to tell a little bit about the Dutch mother of all implementations, how you say that? It's one of the first where we tested the software as well, and it's with 42 media partners using global leaks in its sophisticated way of protecting the sources. And all the national big media houses actually have access to that system, and is using the material to for their own publication. For publicating the news that comes through these sources. One of the things is if you have a clear document with like clearly stating that something is wrong, that you can use as a source, because it's easy to use as a file, but it's very important for media as well to check, to do the fact checking, and that's something where I think the Global Voices community could also play a role in that. But what we want to achieve with the leaks is that it's not that governments are not able to really push it aside, because that's what I always do, government do. So you want actually to work with the bigger media houses to get the outrage to a bigger level. So that's why we find it important in the public case to work with those big media corporations as well. Well, we also emphasized advertisements in the media for citizens to actually leak to that platform, because if that is not known to a big audience, then who knows? So we put a lot of money, resources also into the publicity campaign. Another example is the wildlife crime activism, who are using the same platform. I think Gilo can now talk a little bit about EveryLeaks.
So after we launched the Publics initiative, which you saw in the Netherlands, this one was probably the biggest one. And it had 40 media houses. He was, as the founder of the project, together with the Free Press Unlimited, thought that this could be something that can be replicated in other regions as well. So there was an initiative, a project, we called it Publics, deriving exactly from this. And one of the first regions where we started testing has been Africa. So currently we have let's say in a beta testing, mainly because we are trying to engage journalists throughout the region, around 20, 30 media houses and journalists, going from Maputo, South Africa, Zimbabwe, I think Nigeria, and other different countries. So we have Mail and Guardian, we have Global Witness, Verdade. So some of you who come from the region probably already know these names. And already those of you who go on Twitter and Facebook probably saw something about EveryLeaks, because even if it's at an early stage, we already gave some interviews about it, and there is quite some interest. We find, of course, difficult to engage people in different regions, because the technology is quite easy, but still to achieve full security and anonymity, we have to tell them certain procedures, which require a bit of learning process. It goes through the Tor system, it needs tails. So we try to do it as simple as possible. Someone actually tweeted something 2 days ago saying, "Oh, this is actually very simple, more simple than it can be expected." The initiative, we think we can go live with this probably in the next month. It needed some trainings to the journalists. We were curious to know how complex it would be if it wasn't just a large media house and instead individual journalists, and that's why we are here talking to you. But also individual journalists who work on specific cases. They know people, they have to meet people, sources, and this can happen with bloggers who operate in regions and where discussions must happen at a more sensitive level. So probably something like this can be interesting for the Global Voices community and some of the bloggers that might incur in this. And we can support them, but in any case, everybody can install it. It's an open source software. What we can give is guidelines, and we can say what is happening. This initiative that we're running with HEVOS and Free Press Unlimited, we are actually expanding it in other regions. We have already meetings in the Balkans with the CCRP. We are in Mexico. We are talking also with Le Monde in France. So different parties are interested because they all receive in a way or another some information. And they know that we can do it, they can do it in an anonymous and secure way. So that's why we try to establish this communication. He was supporting the project for 1 year. So we are really happy to be in touch with you or journalists or media houses who can be interested to work on the project. But even more now, I would like to, especially in your case, how it's working now in Hungary. And so it would be good to hear from someone who works more on a specific practical case. But ideally, also start some of you who have questions, or we actually have questions for you on how do you think, and if it's the blogging community might be interested in something like this. Because we want to actually go and boil it down. Initially, this started with larger media houses and the larger media groups. Then we went down with publics to individual journalists in Africa and in Mexico and in the Balkans, and we saw that there was this need. So even now we go more granular, let's say, and we try to understand if this is something interesting for the blogger community. So I would like also to know from you what can be your opinion. But first I would like to give the word to our Hungarian experience, so she can tell you more about how it's actually working there.
Sure, and I actually have a question to you. I think we have launched Magyar Leaks more than a year ago or something, and I was involved in localizing it into Hungarian. And what we did, we produced how-tos for people who want to use Magyar Leaks. So there's a longer how-to with I think 12 steps and a shorter how-to, and also we produce small stickers to put in different places. We were toying with the idea of putting certain writings with with the Tor Onion browser leak to public bodies' toilets, but then in the end we didn't do it. But I think it's an idea. Someone can try it. We haven't tried it yet. And our problem is that most of the leaks, they still come via the traditional means, meaning post, personal, email from an unknown host from abroad, from China, from Korea, whatever. So we have a hard time with promoting it to regular people, because I was saying this toilet thing, because we didn't know how to reach out to people who work in government bodies, for example.
Well, we have an issue with this, and also the usability in a way, because people try to communicate, as you say, via different channels. We are now discussing with the people from Wild Leaks, because in their region people communicate a lot with mobile phones, and one of the what's in the targets of the organization is actually to create a mobile version of Global Leaks. In which case, people are going to actually send information in a quick way, in a secure way. There are challenges, of course, because to make it properly secure, it is still to go through possibly circumvention channels and, of course, HTTPS. But we have to make sure that everything is probably going through the proper channels. Actually, the biggest challenge we found out, and that the journalists said, is that they were receiving too many leaks. Because rather than have just something juicy, but they also receive, my neighbor listened to something and I heard to something. So what the software does, and this is interesting, creates actually some taxonomy where people, when they submit a leak, they can actually decide, okay, this belongs to this belongs to this. It's not 100% guaranteed filter, of course. I mean, because people can still say this is about environmental crime in Congo, and they might send it something else. But let's say that, for example, in the Netherlands, there was they also have this issue receiving a lot of leaks that maybe are not related. But there was one big case when actually a member of the parliament had to step down because they received a leak on the from global leaks, from pub leaks, and then they went out. The same with wild leaks. It's actually very popular and successful. But the filtering of information, that's very hard. The technology is improving because originally it was complex. There is another software as well, it's called Secure Drop, and they are facing the same challenges at the moment. But the usability there, I think it's key because people still send information via email, and there is no way, that's the safest option. What we are trying, the way you can submit a leak, luckily, we say that always Tor is the best way. The Tor browser is to send information via Tor browser. But Hermes also are the maintainers of the software called Tor2Web. And the Tor2Web is actually a way to access the Tor network via normal browser. So you don't have to download Tor to actually send information on the Tor network. This was a software that was originally developed by Aaron Schwartz, and the code now is maintained by Hermes. This is very important because otherwise it's another challenge in terms of usability to tell people download also Tor. So we want to go as close as possible to the best usability moment. It will never be as easy as saying send us any governance. Okay, the software is, we said it's open source, but it relies on a server infrastructure. So it's actually everything depends more on the server side than on the software. If we recommend people to host it with specific hosting companies that we normally have worked in the past, and the one that we often mention is Greenhost. Some of you probably already know them. They are very active in the activist, the human rights community. So they are pretty much trusted, and we know that if something is hosted there, they don't keep the logs. Nothing is actually given out to governments, or they don't allow installation of backdoors. The software is open source, but it's actually fully maintained by Hermes. So there is a core team of developers, but actually it's an entire organization behind it. And I mean, it has all the advantages, of course, of open source. But let's say that with other initiatives like that, and the risk is always happening at the hosting level. So we tell people use a hosting company that is, of course, secure and gives all the guarantees, but eventually it's up to the user to decide how to do it. We, via also this public initiative, we also managed to, let's say, get some support on the server side with Greenhost. We're actually trying to asking them to ease their package prices as well, because they are quite cheap comparing other hosting companies already. But I know that, for example, if we talk about a community of bloggers or we talk about individual journalists, that still can be a challenge. But they are perfectly aware that this is a very important tool, and they are actually quite supportive. So if there is interest, just tell us if you have there is a question over there first. And so we can see how it works. No, it's not working.
Yeah, it was this program, Global Leaks, was developed as an open source software. And we know that it's not as expensive as the proprietary software, but how much will it cost for your software to be used? It has a cost for somewhere, like Red Hat, it's Linux, it's open source, but still we have to buy. So estimate how much would it cost for an organization?
This is completely free. Like the costs are the server software, the server side. The server side is still expensive. I mean, it's like hosting a website, right? Like if you have a website, you will have to pay for your hosting company.
And the point that she raised was as well, like if you don't advertise anything, then nobody knows about it, so there will be no leak. So yeah, put your money on the communication budget, not on the technical budget.
Yes, but in terms of software itself, it's open source. You can actually download it and install it. And some people told us, oh, listen, by the way, there are initiatives also in Finland. They say, we downloaded the software, we're using it. We as an organization are asking them, are you actually doing it safely? Because you can download it, but we give you some recommendations on how to do it. And because that's also the risk.
Thanks. I had a question that kind of relates to impact, and not a technical question, but obviously the incentive to leak is very connected with not only the security of the leaker, but also whether they will actually have an impact, right? Whether their leak will actually become known, whether some kind of change will happen as a result of their leak. And what's the experience been? I mean, obviously there's the very, very famous cases like Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and a few others that have come through WikiLeaks and elsewhere, but what do you think is required in terms of the fact-checking infrastructure, the journalistic infrastructure to ensure, I mean, obviously it also depends on what the information is. You know, some information just isn't going to get any attention for all kinds of reasons. But have you seen cases where actually somebody has a pretty explosive leak, but the NGO or the journalism organization just doesn't do anything with it? Or people kind of get frustrated because they're leaking things and it doesn't have an impact?
Thanks. The way we also recommend how to structure the project. So we develop the software, but we have the experience of these past projects, so we tell, okay, this is the kind of team you should have. So in general, we always recommend to have a project owner and what we call them receivers. The receivers are the journalist, or can be someone working with the journalist. Sometimes there are filtering receivers, because maybe the journalist cannot act by himself or is really busy, so therefore they have an invisible receiver, which is a filter that goes to the journalist. We don't recommend it because this means let the information go through someone else rather than go directly through the journalist. And so the fact that they don't act upon a good information, unfortunately, is out of our scope, because we tell them, try to look at everything that comes in your inbox, on the Global Leaks inbox. Because it's true that there might be a lot of information that is possibly not really relevant at what you are currently working on, but you might find that gem of information that is actually explosive. This depends on the promotion as well. So one issue we had with some of the other initiatives was that they were not promoting it at all. Like they had it installed, they had it prepared, but they were not even mentioning it on their website. They just made the one blog entry and that was it. We say, okay, you can do this way, but the reality is that how it worked, where it worked well, it worked because it was promoted widely. And it was promoted via social networks. It was promoted, like really pushed out. In the Netherlands, large media, there was a slide about it. They actually made it on paper. There was telling the citizens, go to this website, put this information, and it was very successful. This is not the environment, of course, to say we can promote it on normal media, on newspapers. But I would say if there is a network of bloggers in the Middle East, they can actually have pushed this out to their local groups, to their local audience, and via the social networks. So there must be a setup before, which is identify who are the owners, who are the receivers. It's not just installing the software. People can install the software, of course, everybody can, but to make it really successful, we can help them through this initiative to actually have a team, to prepare a team. We train people in the process, which is not complex, but actually to be successful it needs to go through certain procedures.
I think it's also still early stages in the sense that from the real big installation publics, which is at the moment, as far as I can tell, the only serious one. Hungarian is serious as well, but I mean, you don't have the budget for communication, for example. But I also think if you look and in the Netherlands we have all these media regulations, so it's clear what the role of the media can be. If you're talking about the Middle East, where or countries where the media is owned by the state, you have other discussions around it. So there's much more power for a community of bloggers to intercept with this system, but we don't have a clear blueprint on how that should look like, and that's why we open up the discussion with you as well to see how we can do that.
Yes, I wanted to tell that there's a different use of your software, and I'm not sure you intended to make it like that, but there are some cases when the journalist actually knows the source and meets him or her in person, and they tell them to go to Magyar Leaks and send the document over there, and we installed this because we had issues at the time when we started with the media law that was not protecting journalistic sources.
No, completely agree. There are people who use the software in different ways, and it can be done for individuals that you really don't know. It can be done for people, sources that you already know, but they don't want to give you the document, or maybe they don't have the document in that specific moment. It can be for tips, images. The system actually accepts everything. So it has different functionalities. It all depends on the process and the project you want to run it on. On our side, like our role, especially in the context of this initiative we're running throughout this year, is that we can help you out, set up something like this, learning from the previous experiences, discussing the hosting, and this year, luckily via this funding that we had, we can actually meet you. But as I said, our kind of discussion among ourselves was it would be great if maybe there is a community of bloggers that is interested about it, because we guess they are journalists themselves and they probably meet people, they get information on how they try to put this information forward, or are actually information coming that they cannot, or it's risky to put people in danger or expose them. So I guess, yes, our experience in some countries said yes, we found out that there are people who want to communicate us something in a secure way, but we had challenges. So we think that this can be very useful. And I don't know if there was the URL, but of course it's globalleaks.org, and you can have a look there, but you can, now you can, I can give you my contact so we can talk. But anyway, any other question? Otherwise, that's it. I mean, thank you very much. And I hope that if someone has any thought about how to bring forward the conversation on the blogger side, and we bring this offline and see how we can move, if it's something interesting for you folks, and then we can continue discussion separately. Thank you.